It started just after 11 p.m. on a quiet stretch of Route 35, the kind of hour when city lights blur into darkness and routine patrols feel more like a waiting game than real police work. Officer Kyle Benton, 44, sat parked in his cruiser under a flickering traffic light, sipping stale gas station coffee. His shift had been dull, the kind that makes small infractions feel like big wins. When an unfamiliar black SUV cruised past without incident, he didn't see a safe driver heading home. He saw a variable, a question mark. That was enough. The driver, Dr. Lena Brooks, 41, wasn't thinking about police lights or citations. A decorated logistics analyst with the National Guard Reserve, Lena was on her way back from a planning summit at Fort Adams, still in business attire but mentally unwinding. Her vehicle was government-issued, her driving steady. Yet within seconds, flashing lights filled her rearview mirror. Officer Benton didn't walk up with curiosity. He approached with authority already in motion. His flashlight cut into Lena's face. No hello, no explanation. He demanded ID. She complied. When she calmly asked why she was being stopped, his tone shifted. He claimed she'd been drifting lanes, his voice tightening. What followed wasn't a discussion. It was a directive. Step out of the vehicle. In that moment, the story that would later go viral began to take shape. But what made it resonate wasn't just the power imbalance or the legal fallout. It was a psychological choreography that played out in real time. Benton, perhaps unknowingly, stepped into what behavioral scientists call a threat response loop. His perception of challenge activated a defensive rigidity. Lena, on the other hand, leaned into something else. Emotional regulation under stress, a trait trained into her through years of military leadership and logistics crisis planning. She hit record on her phone, not to provoke, but to preserve, because she knew, like so many others, that dignity doesn't always guarantee safety. Lena's voice remained even, but her restraint was not passive. It was tactical. She wasn't just documenting the moment, she was protecting her truth. This encounter wasn't just a snapshot of one night gone wrong. It was a collision between institutional cultures. Law enforcement, in this case, appeared rooted in compliance-first doctrine. Military culture, by contrast, thrives on clarity, hierarchy, and accountability. Benton dismissed Lena's credentials as irrelevant. Lena, drawing from every briefing and mission she'd ever led, prepared for the long game. She didn't fight with volume, she fought with evidence. What unfolded next would become a case study, not just in abuse of authority, but in what happens when social systems clash, when bias meets poise, and when the uniform that should protect becomes the trigger for confrontation. But what made it unforgettable? It was Lena's decision to say, without shouting, "Not this time." And through that one decision, she turned a backroad traffic stop into a national conversation. Officer Kyle Benton didn't see himself as reckless. He saw himself as seasoned. 15 years on the force had given him a hardened exterior and a no-nonsense reputation at Precinct 7 on the west side of Cleveland. He followed the manual, filled out his paperwork on time, and didn't tolerate what he called games from civilians. In his world, authority wasn't earned. It was worn, stitched into the patch on his uniform, and enforced with repetition. That mindset, the habitual exertion of unchecked control, was never questioned. Until now. After stopping Dr. Lena Brooks, Benton didn't think twice. He logged the citation for failure to maintain lane and suspicious behavior. He plugged his body cam into the charging dock like he always did, wrote up the briefest of summaries, and moved on. In the break room the next day, he recounted the incident with a smirk. "Some federal type flashing her ID like I should be impressed," he said, tossing chips into his mouth. His partner, Officer Trevino, furrowed his brow. "Wait, Brooks? You mean Dr. Lena Brooks? Logistics Command at Fort Adams?" Benton paused. "Yeah, said she worked for the Guard or something." Trevino didn't laugh. "She's not just some Fed. She runs interagency ops, teaches crisis response at the War College. That woman has more security clearance than the chief." Suddenly the smirk faded, but it was already too late. Unknown to Benton, Lena had filed complaints not only with Internal Affairs, but with the Inspector General's office. Her phone recording had already made its way to the National Guard's legal division. Within 48 hours, it had been reviewed by Judge Advocate General Staff. This wasn't just a frustrated motorist. This was a strategist who knew exactly which channels mattered and how to use them. Lena didn't file out of spite. She filed because she had to, because she'd seen too many people, especially women of color, walk away from encounters like this one with nothing but frustration and silence. She wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted accountability, and she knew how rare that was. Nationwide studies, like those compiled in the Stanford Open Policing Project, show that black drivers are disproportionately stopped and searched during traffic stops. These pretextual stops, justified by vague reasons like drifting lanes or acting evasively, remain legal but controversial. In Lena's case, she knew the drill. Her calm demeanor, her straight driving, none of it mattered once Benton decided she didn't comply fast enough. Benton's assumptions had been shaped by what psychologists call implicit threat response, a bias-induced perception that control must be reasserted the moment it feels questioned. It wasn't Lena's tone that triggered him. It was her stillness, her poise, the absence of fear. Psychologically, Benton was reacting not to Lena, but to his own need to validate his role. And culturally, the rift was even deeper. Law enforcement culture, especially in jurisdictions with low external accountability, often fosters what sociologists term internal insulation, a resistance to outside critique. Police are trained to see themselves as the last line between chaos and order. Civilian hesitation or inquiry is too often seen not as engagement, but as resistance. On the other side of that divide stood Lena, trained in military coordination, disaster logistics, and interagency diplomacy. Her response wasn't defensive. It was structured. Her decision to report, document, and escalate through legal channels wasn't emotional. It was procedural, a mirror image of the very system Benton thought he controlled. And yet, even with everything Lena brought to the table, rank, poise, and evidence, nothing moved until she triggered a legal review. For 2 days, Benton's body cam footage sat untouched. No one flagged it. No supervisor pulled it up. Only after Lena's formal complaint did the gears begin to turn. This delay isn't uncommon. Across the country, police departments face scrutiny for lagging review processes, especially involving body-worn camera footage. As Gemini recently reported, debates about transparency and review access are escalating in city councils and state legislatures. Some departments have policies requiring footage reviews within 24 hours of an incident involving force or complaint. Others, like Benton's precinct, rely on officer discretion. In Lena's case, that discretion almost buried the event until she refused to let it. By the end of the week, Lena's case had already circulated among legal officers within both the Department of Defense and Ohio's Civil Rights Review Board. The charge wasn't criminal, it was constitutional. Violation of civil rights under color of law, unlawful detainment, abuse of authority. When the envelope landed on Benton's desk marked Notice to Appear, Civil Action, his reaction wasn't panic. It was disbelief. "This won't stick," he muttered to himself. But the look on his captain's face told a different story. This wasn't going away. Inside Precinct 7, whispers began. In a system where silence had always been the safest bet, Benton now found himself on the other side of suspicion. The badge that once gave him power now spotlighted his choices. And Lena? She stayed quiet. She stayed focused. Because she knew that real accountability didn't come with noise. It came with truth, backed by evidence, and followed all the way to its end. The envelope was plain. No red stamp, no urgent seal, just thick paper and a printed label. Notice to Appear, Civil Proceedings. Officer Kyle Benton tore it open in the parking lot outside the station, expecting a departmental memo or another scheduling form. Instead, it was a formal complaint. Civil rights violation. Plaintiff, Dr. Lena Brooks. The charge, unlawful detention and abuse of authority under color of law. At first he laughed. Then he reread it. His laughter dried up. Back inside the station, the mood had shifted. His captain, Mel Carter, a straight-talking leader in his late 50s with decades of oversight experience, called him in. The blinds were already down. "Kyle," Carter started, voice level, "we need to talk." Benton crossed his arm, still trying to play unbothered. This about the traffic stop? Carter didn't blink. It's about the lieutenant colonel you wrote up for failing to signal. She was smug, Benton replied. Flashed her credentials like I was supposed to bow. Carter leaned forward. Do you even know who she is? I don't care. You should, Carter replied, because she's not bluffing. She's backed by the Guard's legal division, and she has 2 recordings of the stop, hers and yours. Benton opened his mouth, then closed it. The room went quiet. The investigation was no longer internal. Lena had filed through the Ohio Civil Rights Office and had already spoken with the Federal Inspector General. She'd attached her footage. Her lawyers, familiar with constitutional litigation, cited prior cases where traffic stops like this, unjustified, prolonged, and rooted in perceived noncompliance, had led to settlements or judgments. They were building a record, not just for Lena, but for precedent. And Benton? He was walking into a courtroom. Lena wasn't preparing for a fight. She was preparing for proof. Her attorney, Camille Hart, was methodical and sharp, former civil rights litigator, now specializing in military-civilian conflict cases. Together, they reviewed every second of the video. No raised voice, no resistance, no violation on Lena's end, just calm questions and a quiet camera click. But this wasn't just about one night. Legally, Camille argued that Benton's actions violated Lena's Fourth Amendment rights. No probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, and most importantly, no justification for escalating to a sobriety test. Benton's defense team would likely invoke qualified immunity, the controversial legal shield that protects officers unless they violate clearly established rights. But Hart was ready. Case law was shifting. State-level courts had begun chipping away at those protections. In the last 30 days alone, legal analysts flagged 2 cases where federal judges allowed civil suits against officers in similar stop-and-search cases to proceed to trial. Lena's case was well-positioned to push that trend forward. Still, Lena wasn't seeking headlines. She didn't leak the story. She didn't post a single comment. But the whispers were growing. Legal circles were already watching the case, not because of who Lena was, but because of what she represented. She was the civilian who had structure, the woman who didn't crack, a black officer who turned every stereotype inside out and held her line with strategy, not volume. She told her legal team, I'm not trying to make noise. I'm trying to build a record. And the record was growing. Internal reports, policy reviews. Even the Department of Justice had begun compiling incident data for the department Benton worked under. Lena's case had become a flag in the system, a signal that oversight was watching. As Benton prepared his statement, his confidence faded. The footage was undeniable. His tone, his posture, his choice to demand she exit the vehicle without cause. All of it captured, all of it time-stamped. Even the fact that no supervisor reviewed the footage until after Lena filed her complaint, a policy failure that Gemini reports show is a recurring accountability gap in departments nationwide. And Lena? She didn't waver. She showed up to court the way she'd led operations overseas, with precision, with poise, and with purpose. Her case wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding the system what it claims to protect. That dignity isn't situational. That power, when unchecked, becomes dangerous. And that silence, no matter how safe it feels, cannot hold back truth forever. The courtroom was quiet. No breaking news banners, no reporters with cameras yet. Just murmurs. Quiet uniforms from both the National Guard and Cleveland PD filled the benches. Some came out of support, some out of curiosity, but everyone in the room knew this wasn't just about a traffic stop. Dr. Lena Brooks walked into the room in full-service uniform, polished shoes, ribbons in place, posture sharp as ever. Her presence wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted visibility. She wanted the jury to see what Officer Kyle Benton didn't: a decorated leader, a strategist, a public servant who demanded the same respect she gave. Benton sat across the room, dressed in a standard charcoal suit. His expression was blank, but his hands clenched on the table betrayed his nerves. The judge, Margaret Ellis, opened the session. Mid-60s, respected in civil litigation, known for her balanced demeanor. We're here today to evaluate whether the rights of Dr. Lena Brooks were violated during a routine traffic stop conducted by Officer Kyle Benton on the evening of April 3rd. Lena took the stand first. Her lawyer, Camille Hart, guided her through the timeline. Calm, clear, controlled. I was driving home from Fort Adams. I was not speeding. I was not swerving. I was not impaired. And when Officer Benton approached, how did he engage you? No greeting. He shined a light in my face and immediately demanded ID. Did you ask why you were stopped? Yes, he claimed I drifted between lanes. I disagreed but complied. When I asked again for clarification, he ordered me out of the vehicle. Did you resist? No. Did you raise your voice? Number Y turned on my phone and began recording. And why did you record the interaction? Because I've lived long enough to know that when you don't document the truth, people rewrite it. The courtroom stayed silent. A few pens scratched. A few heads nodded. Camille then played the video. First, Lena's phone. Crisp, no editing. Then Benton's body cam. A second angle. No raised voice from Lena. No erratic driving. Just a calm woman being treated as a threat. When it ended, the air felt heavier. The defense attorney, Ron Petros, took his turn. Dr. Brooks, is it possible Officer Benton was simply following procedure? Procedure requires probable cause. I wasn't presenting any threat. Could he have been acting out of caution? Caution doesn't justify escalation without cause. Petros tried again. Did your position as a federal employee affect your behavior during the stop? Yes, I knew I had to stay composed. I also knew it wouldn't protect me. That answer landed like a stone. She wasn't saying she expected to be above the law. She was saying the law hadn't always protected her. Then it was Benton's turn. He didn't testify. His attorney advised against it. But he watched as his own footage played again, frame by frame. The jury saw him hover near his holster, saw his expression tighten when Lena asked for a reason, saw him demand compliance without providing one. Camille addressed the court. Officer Benton's body cam wasn't reviewed until days later. That's not just a delay, it's a systemic failure. According to Gemini's reporting, departments with lax review timelines often leave problematic stops unchecked unless a formal complaint is filed. Dr. Brooks had to activate the process herself. That burden should not fall on the civilian. She continued, this wasn't about a lane change. It was about power, a public servant weaponizing discretion, and when faced with someone who wouldn't submit quietly, he escalated. Benton's defense leaned on qualified immunity. Petros cited precedents, but Camille pushed back. The courts are evolving. In recent rulings, judges have begun allowing suits like this to move forward. Why? Because silence has covered misconduct too long. If rights don't apply equally at a traffic stop, where do they? The jury took 3 days. When they returned, the courtroom was thinner, but Lena sat in the same posture, same uniform, unmoved. Judge Ellis read the verdict. In the matter of Brooks versus Benton, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. No gasp, no cheers, just stillness. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. Officer Benton acted without probable cause and escalated a routine encounter unjustifiably. Benton flinched. His attorney whispered something. He didn't respond. While no criminal charges will be pursued at this time, the court awards $42,000 in damages to Dr. Brooks. Furthermore, this ruling will be submitted to the Department of Justice and the City of Cleveland for internal review. Lena didn't smile. She didn't blink hard. She simply exhaled. Later that day, Benton was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. The department cited a pattern of complaints previously dismissed without full review. Lena returned to Fort Adams without fanfare. No interviews, no headlines. But word traveled. In legal blogs, in community forums, in military briefings. Her case became an example. An internal study on power dynamics and procedural justice. Her story was used in a training program launched that same quarter by the DOJ, designed to educate officers on trauma-informed policing and implicit bias, two areas often neglected in field instruction. What Lena proved wasn't that authority is broken. She proved it needs guardrails. And that quiet resistance, disciplined, documented, and deliberate, can shift entire conversations. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied slowly. Dr. Lena Brooks sat still, not stunned, not emotional, just grounded, like she'd trained herself to be. The decision wasn't a victory parade. It was an acknowledgement. It meant that the law had, for once, recognized what it had too often ignored. Her attorney, Camille Hart, leaned over. "You could have asked for more," she whispered. Lena shook her head. "It was never about the money." Outside, a few reporters waited at the courthouse steps. Not a full press swarm, just local journalists and one regional network team. Officer Kyle Benton walked past them briskly, head down, court folder pressed against his chest. He didn't speak, didn't pose, just got in his car and drove off. Inside, Lena pulled out her phone. One notification blinked on the screen. "Case closed. Verdict in your favor." She stared at it for a second, then locked the screen and stood. Word of the ruling spread quickly across military circles, especially in leadership seminars and base command groups. Lena's quiet defiance, rooted in protocol, backed by evidence, was used as a case study in situational response and institutional accountability. Her courtroom presence wasn't just powerful, it was instructive. Back at Precinct 7, things felt different. Benton had been placed on administrative leave pending further review. Though not fired, he was no longer shielded by the silence that once insulated him. He wasn't the officer people joked with at the coffee machine anymore. He was the subject of internal whispers and a potential department-wide audit. According to Gemini's latest trends, the Department of Justice had expanded pattern or practice investigations into several mid-sized departments like Benton's, particularly those with prior complaints tied to pretextual stops and use of force escalations. While Lena's case alone didn't trigger a federal review, it contributed to a broader pattern now under scrutiny. The $42,000 civil award issued by the court was symbolic, but it echoed a deeper question. Why does it take rank, credentials, and legal backing to make the system respond? That was the part Lena couldn't ignore. She knew most people in her position, black women especially, don't get their day in court. They don't have a decorated service record. They don't have institutional backing or legal support. And because of that, most don't file. Most just swallow the moment and move on, hoping the next stop ends differently. Lena wasn't interested in being a hero, but she knew the story had resonance. She knew her silence would have been comfort for those who misuse power, and that speaking up, even quietly, mattered more than the outcome. She also understood the trade-off. In the weeks following the verdict, she declined all interview requests. She didn't want to be the face of a movement. She wanted the system to reflect on itself, not her. Still, her presence lingered. In mid-May, the Cleveland Police Oversight Commission initiated a policy review on body cam procedures and post-stop reporting. A civilian board, previously seen as symbolic, suddenly had teeth. Not because the system changed overnight, but because a clear, undeniable example gave it leverage. Benton's name appeared in that review. So did other officers who, like him, had faced complaints without consequence. What Lena taught the department wasn't just about rights or procedures. She exposed how easy it was for unchecked assumptions to define an entire encounter, and how dangerous it is when systems treat professionalism as optional. Weeks later, Lena was back at Fort Adams, overseeing a multi-agency logistics exercise. Nothing about her demeanor had changed. She still called roll on time, still ran ops with precision, but among her staff, there was a new kind of respect. Not because she won a lawsuit, but because she never stopped showing up, and because she stood for something without needing a spotlight. Lena didn't need the last word. The court had already spoken, and the silence that followed was no longer indifference, it was reflection. 2 months later, Dr. Lena Brooks stood at the front of a lecture room inside Fort Adams, addressing a fresh cohort of recruits, most of them barely out of basic training. They were young, eager, and staring at her like she had answers to everything. But today wasn't about logistics strategy or convoy protocols. It was about something deeper. "Let me ask you all a question," Lena said, her voice steady but warm. "How many of you think that wearing a uniform earns you respect?" Hands went up, some quick, some hesitant. She nodded. "I get it. The uniform represents service, discipline, honor. But here's the truth. She let the room settle. Respect isn't owed, it's proven. Every day, in every choice. She stepped closer to the front row. Same goes for authority. The badge, the rank, the role. It's not a shield. It's a weight. And if you can't carry it with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. No one moved. Then she told them the story. Not with drama, not with bitterness, just the facts. I was pulled over late one night by an officer who assumed I didn't belong in the vehicle I was driving, in the position I held, or in the quiet strength I used to hold my line. He didn't see a leader. He saw a problem, she paused, not for effect, but for breath. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I didn't back down. I recorded it. I filed it. I stood in court and told the truth. Silence. The good kind. The kind that meant it landed. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable until he saw my rank, not just on my chest, in how I carried myself. That's what leadership looks like. That's what accountability demands. Around the country, Lena's case had quietly reshaped the narrative in training halls and civilian oversight forums. Her story became a recommended study in trauma-informed policing and racial bias mitigation programs. Gemini recently noted that departments across 4 states had cited her case in new pilot programs designed to retrain officers on traffic stop de-escalation, reinforcing discretion with empathy, not ego. But Lena didn't care about the attention. She cared about the recruits in front of her because they would wear the uniform next. They would make the next decision on a dark road. They would carry the next weight. She closed the folder in her hand. Leadership isn't how loud you speak. It's how clearly you stand when the moment demands more than muscle. It's knowing when to step forward and knowing when to step aside. As the session ended, no one rushed out. Some lingered. Others approached quietly, asking questions, not about procedures, but about character. Lena offered what she always had, clarity, not comfort. Because for her, leadership wasn't a lesson. It was a legacy, and now it belonged to them too.